Hello, Psychomotivation. How are you today? I'm doing well. I've got the ambition, I got the motivation to record, I don't know, 3-4 lectures today. So that's kind of the way I work. I assemble them, get the assignments squared away, embed the assignments in, and then they're ready to go. So today's the taping day, and it is a poor substitute for being in person. I know I've said that before. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to talk about goal setting, we're going to talk about goal striving, and I believe we're going to reveal homework 5 very early in this lecture. Right? There'll also be an associated assignment all the way in lecture 10, so we're not going to leave goals behind just that quick. Let's talk about goals. And plans is one way. A goal without a plan is just a wish, and pithy little quotes, you know. But when you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. If I don't bother to plan, that is, I want something, but I have no plan to attain it, then I might as well just wish for it and call it good. And if you find that concept intriguing, we do a lecturette on hope in Psych of Emotion that differentiates hope from wish. And I think it's a useful concept. Regardless, that's just an unsolicited advertisement. Hey, commercials are everywhere, hey? Right? So, let's look at plans and the Tote Unit. What does the Tote Unit mean? It's a super simple model. Let's just check it out here. First comes a test. We compare our present state with our ideal state. So I'm sitting here and saying, boy, is this what I want to do? Is there something else I'd rather do? And to the extent that if the ideal state and the present state are incongruous, then it causes a level of tension that manifests itself often in the form of motivation. So we act on the environment, this is the operate phase, act on the environment to realize the ideal state, and that's the motivational opportunity. Now the second test is to see how we're doing. Have we achieved the ideal state, or are we still far enough away from it that we need to do more? And you can see that there's 2 lines coming out of the second test box, right? So we go from test to operate to retest, and then if it's incongruous, we're taken back along the channel to operate and work a little harder to get the ideal state closer, get the present state closer to the ideal state. Now, if it is congruent, then we're good to go, right? And the present state is close enough, good enough, right? And you can see that this allows for a variable when we say it's the congruity with the ideal state and the present state matches up, but to what extent and to how much, right? And that's where a little individual difference might come in. Also, the nature of the importance of the state. Now, plans, let's talk in terms of discrepancy. The present state represents the person's current state, their perception of how life is going at this time, and perception, of course, in psychology is the all-important word. The ideal state represents how the person wishes life was going, how this situation is unfolding, right? Well, notice the distance here is what we're going to label discrepancy. So when the present state falls short, right, of the hoped for ideal state, a discrepancy is exposed, it comes to mind. It's the discrepancy rather than the ideal state per se that has the motivational properties. And that's no small concept, right? It's the difference that motivates. It's not that, oh, the ideal state, look how marvelous it is. If I've made no comparison to my current state, then it reveals no discrepancy, and the ideal state has little motivational property. So for it to be personally motivating, it should be a relevant discrepancy. Discrepancy creates a sense of wanting, right, to change the present state so it will be more, it'll move closer and closer to the ideal state, again depending on importance. Now we can see the motivational potential for discrepancy, but there's 2 types of discrepancy. Now some discrepancies we simply want to reduce based on the discrepancy detecting feedback that underlies the plans and the corrective motivation. Discrepancy reduction, right, is plan-based corrective motivation. It's corrective motivation. Discrepancy reduction is reactive. That is, wow, I'm in a state that's not the state I want. Then I have to reduce this discrepancy. I'm motivated to reduce this discrepancy so that I feel more congruent in this regard. It revolves around a feedback system. Note that this is somewhat similar to the mechanism of reducing cognitive dissonance. That is, if I'm experiencing dissonance, if I believe that my ideal behavior is this and I commit a behavior that's that, it reveals a discrepancy. And according to Festinger, the discrepancy creates anxiety, which we're motivated to reduce. And that way we correctively change our behavior or change our attitude to match what's going on. In this case, where we want to be the ideal state. So we often reduce or are motivated to reduce this discrepancy, but it's a corrective, it's a reactive. Oh shit, this isn't the way I want it to go, so I better do something about it. Discrepancy creation is a powerful tool for us, and this is the second form of discrepancy. This is based on a feed-forward system in which I look forward and proactively set a higher goal. So I'm intentionally, and we'll use the word intentionally, we could probably create situations where it's less intentional, but I intentionally create a discrepancy. That is, this is where I am now, but this is where I would prefer to be. So my wife and I, right, we're thinking about moving one of these days. So we look at houses. But notice we're creating the discrepancy. We can live just fine where we are till retirement and beyond. But we want something more. So we're creating a goal, right, that has some distance from where we're at. We have created the discrepancy, and that discrepancy motivates us to get off the dime. That is to look at our finances, control our finances, start looking at houses, starting to understand housing markets, right, and imagining what life might be. This is something that we've created for ourselves, right? It's not in response to something. So discrepancy creation corresponds to goal-setting motivation, and that is we're setting a goal that at some point in the future we're going to move, we'd like to have a little property, right? And we have the conditions, what appears to be the ideal for that point in time. Discrepancy creating is proactive, it's growth promoting, right? Growth pursuing. So we're looking at a different lifestyle. And it's funny because I often sit at the computer, and I look at different houses, and I imagine what it would be like waking up in this house and maybe having a window with this tremendous view and sitting there drinking coffee as I plan my day. That this is a goal that I'm creating for myself or for the both of us, right? So it revolves around a feed-forward system, proactive rather than reactive. Now, here's homework 5. And what we can look at here, I think, critically, is it's time for us to start reintegrating some past material in this course to where we are currently. And I'm going to bet that you guys have noticed an awful lot of similarities between concepts. And that's not unusual, because we have theorists who are kind of on the same page, but they're using different terminology or coming at these ideas from slightly different angles. But there's a lot of consistency between their mid-range theories, and that's basically where we've been. Once we left the first and second lecture of the course, we've been living in a land that's much more akin to mid-range theories than grand explain-it-all theories. Remember that? Bet you do. Now, discrepancies motivate. So that's bottom line here. The interesting difference between discrepancy reduction and discrepancy reduction and discrepancy creation can be tied to, and let's think about it, avoidance versus approach, and kind of line these up, right? Did you see the typo? I saw the typo. That's really embarrassing. So we're going to fix the typo because I just can't stand it now. You'd think you look this stuff over, you look it over, you reread it, and there you go. So it's still not perfect. Of course, we know that it will never be perfect, but there we go. So I feel better already. Do you feel better? You're going to cut me some slack on that? Okay. Anyway, I apologize. I understand these are not the most professional videos ever, but when you got a crew of one, hey, we hope for the best. So, look, avoidance versus approach. Approach could be more akin to which? Discrepancy reduction or discrepancy creation. Right? Guilt versus anxiety. Well, you know, if I'm living in a reactive world where all I'm doing is fixing the difference between present and ideal, I might feel guilty. But note, the downside in existential psychologists, existential philosophers, which I seem to can't get enough of over the last year or two, right? What we see then is anxiety is often the issue when we look at present to ideal in terms of discrepancy creation. Can I do it? Can I make it happen? So it makes us anxious. And ultimately, the existential psychologists and philosophers say you have two choices in life. You can stay still, or God forbid, move backwards and feel the guilt of not moving forward, or you can move forward into the ever unknown and feel anxiety. A heartwarming kind of approach to understanding one's world bestowed upon us by existential psychology or philosophy. Reactivity versus proactivity, those are a lock, right? Stagnation versus growth. Okay? Performance versus mastery, and these are concepts we'll discuss in future lectures. And then, remember that perceived locus of control? Well, if I'm acting in a reactive fashion, then often we can describe that as having a relatively perceived locus of control, a low perceived locus of control. And what that means is I'm just reacting. I'm doing things because I feel that I have to. Whereas if I have a high PLOC and I see myself as a mover, a shaker, the big actor in my life, then you can see where I might be more inclined to create discrepancies, to be more proactive. So it kind of just ties it to these concepts, at least loosely, that we've discussed already. So homework 5, your instructions, let's get with it. So to better get a handle on ourselves and our choices, let's each provide an example of discrepancy reduction. Yes, I provided an example below because I'm trying really hard to incorporate that. Since we can't discuss in class necessarily, I think examples become even more important. But then what we're going to do is once I create a discrepancy reduction scenario, then one of my teammates is going to pick one of the scenarios from the team, a discrepancy reduction scenario, and reframe it into a discrepancy creation scenario. So, yeah, from avoidance to approach. Let's be proactive. Let's own our lives more every day. And this is our path to authenticity, self-actualization, if you will. It's the exercise of mindfulness. So, in the example, and here's my example, there's going to be a place for you to put your name. So, in this case, we're going to talk boots, right? And this is the discrepancy reduction example. I was supposed to submit that analysis to my boss today, and it's only half finished. I'm going to have to put in the overtime today so I can at least get it to him tomorrow. Okay, so the ideal state is turning it in on time or turning it in at all. The present state is I ain't there yet. I'm going to reduce the discrepancies, so I'm playing discrepancy reduction. That is, I got to get this done. So what am I going to do? My plan is, and notice this contains the plan. So it's the current state. I ain't done. The ideal state is I need to get it done. And the plan is to work overtime to get it done. So in this statement, right, you have to have those three components. Present state, ideal state, and the plan to move from the present to the ideal in a reactive fashion, because this is the discrepancy reduction. Now, one of your teammates is then going to read your statements. There's 4 team members. There's 4 statements to choose from. I don't want you guys to double up, right? So I want everyone, each team member produces a statement that demonstrates discrepancy reduction. And then each team member is going to respond to a different team member and reframe it as discrepancy creation. So there's 2 statements you have to make, your own discrepancy reduction, and then respond to somebody else's with a discrepancy creation reframing. So the reframing for this, and Clinton did this one, right? So Boots did the original, and Clinton's going to do the other one, just like the instructions. I just got an email from my boss requesting a final draft of the report by the end of the week. I'm going to shift things around on my schedule, take a bit of work home, get that report by Thursday. Discrepancy creation. I am going to do even more. I'm going to do better in this regard. I want to be the go-to person around here that's known for being ahead of schedule. So what I'm doing is, my ideal state, then, we can say, is I want to be known as the go-to person. So what I'm doing is setting a goal for myself, right, which creates a discrepancy. And that is going to motivate me to be Johnny on the spot, to bust my ass and get it done earlier. So notice just the reactive discrepancy reduction, but I'm going to get it done best as I can. The discrepancy creation is growth oriented. Okay, so that's a big difference there. And notice, present state, ideal state, and plan to achieve. So your mission for homework 5 is to provide discrepancy reduction example, then to respond to a teammate's example by reframing it to a discrepancy creation example. So one of each, please. You're going to be doing 2 statements then. Make sure everyone gets a response to their discrepancy reduction. So let's not pile up. Let's not do 3 creation examples for one person's discrepancy. Let's mix it up. Now, ideally, what's going to happen? Well, you got to get this done. You got to start earlier, right? So you got to, get this done maybe 2 days before it's due, so you have 2 days to work on the second piece. So between your teams, you figure it out for yourselves what the timing's going to be. Create the deadlines for you. What did I say? Create the deadlines. Now, I've created the one deadline, the ultimate deadline, but it's your opportunity to engage in discrepancy creation by creating an earlier deadline for part 1 of the assignment, right? And so it goes, and you can see on the assignment when you get on Carmen, you're going to have the name and then do the discrepancy reduction example, and then the name of the person responding with the discrepancy creation example that's around the same issue. Questions? All right, so if there's 4 people on the team, I'm going to see 8 statements in all, right? Okay. Goals, challenge. What do we know? Well, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And another pithy little quote, right? Take it as you will. But this is part of discrepancy creation. You can see how we're building concept to concept. That is, I'm going to create a discrepancy. And that is, like when I retire, I want to write a book. I know what the book is, right? I haven't written the book. That's my present state. I got some notes. I got some outlines. I want to write the book. I'm creating a discrepancy for myself. And what is the plan? Well, as I approach this activity, right, part of the plan is to retire. Part of the plan then is to set a certain amount of time aside, Monday through Friday, let's say, to do my writing. I learned that from a writer. I don't know if you know of this person. It's going back in time. His name was Victor French, and he worked on Little House on the Prairie with Michael Landon, television show. They did another show after that, and Victor was a writer, a director, an actor. He did 1 billion westerns where he played a real hard ass. He was always a heavy. But I remember talking to Victor about his writing, and he said, Mark, I don't necessarily like writing. I mean, I do, but I don't. And I find it hard to sit down and write sometimes. And he says, ultimately, through my struggles, what I've learned now that I got some years under my belt is this is the time I write. And I schedule that time. That's his plan, right? So he makes a plan. And I will write from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. And he says, then what I do is I sit down at my writing desk. And that's where I sit. And maybe I write, maybe I don't, but I don't leave that desk because that is my time to do it. And I've committed to myself to do that. So you can see how people develop plans to accomplish their goals. It challenges you, and then it changes you. And he was a very, very productive writer. He wrote countless TV scripts, right? And directed countless television shows. Or episodes, I should probably say, not countless shows, but episodes. So, goal setting then. Hey, it's whatever you're trying to accomplish. And the standard is a definition of what adequate performance is. And the incentive is a performance criterion for reinforcement. So we look at the standard, and that's the reference point for guiding subsequent mental physical action. So one can evaluate the adequacy of one's performance. And note that if one of our basic needs, and we talked about this just yesterday in our Zoom meeting, that for some of you competence is very important, but you need feedback to label your performance as competent or superior, if you will, right? So you have to have some kind of measure built into this system. It defines the crossover point between satisfaction and dissatisfaction. So as I produce something, it attains this measurable level of success where when it gets above that level, that point, then I say, yes, I'm satisfied with that. But once I set that level, the standard, if I'm below it, note that being below that standard has a motivational property within itself. That is, I must achieve or exceed the standard. Now, the incentive is a target reward to aim for, usually an external object to aim for, such as money or a high grade. And you could say, well, this is a finished script. I want to do this script, and my minimum standard for what I believe to be a good script, and you've got that figured out in your mind, so that's kind of the standard portion. And the incentive is that I will, if this script attains a certain level, then it should be saleable, and I can make money from selling this script, right? Or maybe it's turning in a paper to get the grade that you want. Okay. So, how difficult and specific goals raise performance to remove goal performance discrepancies. That is, how do we kind of win the day? How do we do this successfully? Well, we set a goal. And notice that when it's difficult, it energizes behavior. It increases effort. The person works harder. It increases persistence. The person works longer. And the idea is that if it's difficult, then it challenges you and you benefit from participating in the process. If you just do this and you achieve the same old, there's no self-actualization, there's no growth, there's none of these components that are reinforcing in and of themselves. Now, the other aspect of a goal is making it specific, right? So we got to know. It's not some loosey-goosey goal that's ill-defined. Well, maybe I'll write a script someday, right? No, my goal is I'm going to write a book, and the first book that I want to write, I've got a couple in my head, but the first book I want to write is not the most fun of all the books. I've got some fun books I'm considering writing. A book about cats would be fun, right? A book about some of my former occupations would be fun. But the first book I'm going to write is called The Competition Myth, right? And it's going to be a difficult book because it's going to require a good dose of research and a high level of organization, and it's going to present an argument. So the standard, it's going to be difficult to do because I'm essentially writing for an audience that I'm used to performing in front of, that is an academic audience, right? So it'll be a popular press book, but still that level. Now, notice the specificity with which I'm talking, and I've got, a couple chapter outlines, and we'll continue to get more specific, right? And why do I do that? Well, it increases attention, and it allows me to begin to work with a focus. So now I don't get lost in this morass of uncertainty. It is, okay, so how's chapter 1 coming along? Chapter 1 has got to make these 3 points, these specific points, and chapter 1 is going to make those 3 specific points with these arguments, all right? So what am I going to do this morning, on Tuesday morning, as I wake up to do my writing? Well, I'm going to tackle these specific elements of the task, all right? Now, fortunately, and for those of you who especially are going to go to graduate school, and produce a master's thesis and produce a dissertation, if it goes well for you, if it goes as well for you as it went for me, writing a master's thesis and writing a dissertation were awesome. And especially when I got to my dissertation, I did my master's thesis under Tetlock's tutelage, but for Marilyn Brewer was my dissertation, and she's the most organized person on the planet. And we broke it down into 4 chapters. We broke down the chapters into their component parts. We decided there would be 4 drafts per chapter. They would be done on this schedule. It was the most systematic thing, and it relieved so much burden and so much pressure, because I knew every day I sat down from yesterday what I was going to do. And that's a tremendous feeling. So it directs behavior. It increases attention. Person works with focus, right? It increases planning, right? And therefore you work smarter. And I learned so much through these experiences that I'm going to take it with me to authorship, right, of different books, right? And a lot of that is because both Marilyn and Phil were just so damn organized and had so much writing of their own under their belt. They had so much experience, which they so freely shared, and for which I'm so thankful. You know, I might complain about working at Ohio State now and again, but when it comes right down to it, the opportunities that I was afforded and the things I've learned are really irreplaceable. And I can't imagine. I mean, yes, it could have happened somewhere else, but I don't imagine that it did. Regardless, what we're going to do is set a goal. We're going to make it a level of difficulty that makes that goal, achievement of the goal, meaningful and rewarding in and of itself, intrinsically, right? And then, when specific, allows us to keep our behavior on track and not fall prey to, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. And we know how dangerous that is. So the old saying, and I'll give you another one, I don't have it in here. What's the old saying? Those who fail to plan to fail. And maybe they don't plan to fail, but they sure don't plan to succeed. So let's put it that way. Now, I want to talk about Hertzberg's two-factor theory of motivation. It's a fascinating idea. And why do I call it fascinating? What do I think about this? Well, often you've probably been given an employee satisfaction survey. And these things are often confusing. They'll say, how dissatisfied are you with your job? And you might have a scale that's anchored on one end, totally dissatisfied, and then the scale is anchored on the other end by totally satisfied. And what Hertzberg's saying is that's fundamentally flawed. It's conceptually flawed. He says dissatisfaction and demotivation of workers comes from what he calls hygiene factors. These are basic needs that are not being met. So these are deficiencies, these hygiene factors, and this is what ultimately causes employee dissatisfaction and employees to become demotivated. The weird thing is, if you change it, if you address these issues, then you remove dissatisfaction, so the dissatisfaction goes away, but it doesn't satisfy people. These are like basic needs. So I want adequate pay, I want adequate safety, etc. And if it's unsafe or my pay is low, I'm going to get all jacked up and I'm going to get all worked out about it, and I'm going to become demotivated and dissatisfied. But if you give me decent pay and you make the workplace safe, all you've done is remove my dissatisfaction. According to Hertzberg, we've not pushed it to the other end of the scale, which is satisfaction, right? So employees are not dissatisfied, right? But they're kind of neutral about it. Now, the motivating factors is where pause of satisfaction occurs and we see employee motivation. So as leaders, as supervisors, we have two kind of standards to achieve. We have the standard that says we're going to run a workplace that offers sufficient benefits, safety, pay, etc., so that you're not dissatisfied. But then we have to offer you in that same workplace opportunities that allow for growth and satisfaction. So let's look at some examples. Jobs with poor company policies, jobs with poor administration, jobs with poor technical supervision, poor salary, interpersonal relationships are poor with supervisors. That's dissatisfying. So let's fix that shit. And notice that this sounds like discrepancy reduction. This is the present state. My ideal state is I want good company policies, good administration, good salary, good working conditions, and what happens as a result, I reduce the discrepancy from dissatisfaction, but reducing that discrepancy only yields a lack of dissatisfaction. Now, how do we then operate on satisfaction? Well, notice this is the avoid, this is the avoiding pain. Let's talk about no satisfaction. This job doesn't offer me much achievement feedback. This job doesn't offer me much recognition. This job doesn't offer me stimulating work. It doesn't offer me responsibility that I'd like to have. It doesn't allow for advancement, right? Maybe autonomy you want to put on this list. It doesn't provide me a sense of competence. But if you're a successful manager, a successful supervisor, then you build into the process elements that offer achievement, that offer recognition. You re-engineer the work so that it can be stimulating. You allow people to take responsibility and build their autonomy. You provide opportunities for advancement, and now you see people become satisfied. So again, this is more akin, I believe, if we want to stay with the lingo throughout the lecture, that the dissatisfaction and reducing dissatisfaction is discrepancy reduction. Right? It gets us back to basics. That is the level that we would expect to be at. But if we really want to set people on fire, that is, we want people to be really motivated and kicking some serious ass on our company's behalf, our organization's behalf, then we have to focus on their satisfaction. Right? And we do this by offering them opportunities. Ideally, we work in conjunction with the people and have them have a voice in creating their own opportunities and what they believe to be opportunities. And this is then discrepancy creation. So you can see how these concepts can work in the workplace. This is where we gain rewards. So we've got avoiding pain is eliminating the dissatisfaction, but the reward comes from a proactive approach, discrepancy creation. So you can see I'm kind of doing a mashup here with these concepts. So we're playing synthesist. Now, what does this sound like? Well, check it out. Let's look at Abraham Maslow and Maslow's Pyramid, and what do we see? Well, we see here that maybe the first three, we can argue this one maybe straddles this middle, belongingness and love needs, straddles the dissatisfaction, satisfaction borderline, right? But note that if we don't meet the needs of physiological needs or safety needs, then we're going to see dissatisfaction. But as Maslow warned us, and I think Hertzberg would agree, that these represent the removal of dissatisfaction. If these occur, if these are lacking, then we have discrepancy reduction, being motivated. Now, discrepancy creation and or Hertzberg satisfaction, motivating factors appear. Do we meet a person's esteem needs and their need to self-actualize? That is to achieve one's full potential, including creative activities. So we can see here that Maslow's pyramid is really a good example of Hertzberg's ideas and is in line with discrepancy reduction and creation. Now, another motivator that's less pleasant to consider might be the power of inequity. And the power of inequity is ever increasing. What we know is that when I was growing up, and I've said this before, when I was a kid, we talked about the 10%. The 10% holds, most of the wealth. Well, now we know it's the 1%, and what we're exposed to is ever-increasing inequity. The old cliche, and it must be cliche day, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And the rich are an increasingly smaller club, right? And the poor seem to be an ever-swelling mass. And who, if we're thinking in terms of making explanations that depend on class and class position, well, of course, we might want to think then of Karl Marx and the power of inequity. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. And I don't know anything about this yet, but let's just toss it out there. The president of Ohio State University said, we have a plan to make college affordable. And that by, what did she say, 10 years from now? In 10 years, nobody is going to leave Ohio State with college, or at least unmanageable college debt. And note how the idea that you have to have a college degree or you can't do anything. All right, so that's the first setup. You get set up. If you don't have a college degree, then you're going to be working at McDonald's, running the French fry machine for the rest of your existence, right? So we set that up as a threat. So people say, well, I got to get a college degree. So they come to college, but then the price of college is ever increasing. It just keeps going up and up and up and up. But the banks are more than willing to loan the money, and that's why the prices are going up. But what happens is it creates a larger and larger debtor class as we go on. So we're sold the idea that we can't succeed if we don't have a college degree, and then the price of the college degree is ever increasing. But lo and behold, there's people willing to loan us the money. But what happens is then we become, essentially indentured servants for the rest of our life. Right? I look at my poor sister-in-law. It was like she was never, ever going to pay back for nursing school, that it was just never going to be possible. Maybe by the time she retired, she'd have her student loans for nursing school paid off. And she went to a private school. That's a problem. She has since joined the Army Reserve, years ago, to get those loans forgiven and to work it off. And it was a good idea, but should she have had to done that? And we're all very proud of Major Buneman. Yeah, she's achieved the rank of Major in the Army Reserve. So we're like, oh, you go, Margaret. But the power of inequity as a motivator, right? Adam's take on exchange relationships. The big question is, here's my inputs, and here's my outcomes. The big question is, do they match up, right? And note that our class can be a little model for this with assignments. That is, I would prefer to distribute points equally to each person, but I know that some of you might find that less than desirable. If you work harder and someone else does the bare minimum, why should they get the same number of points that you do? That is, we want our inputs to equal our outcomes. And we want the same, not just for us, but for everyone else with whom we're participating, right? So there's 3 equity evaluation outcomes then when we measure input versus output. We might achieve equity. That is, we believe that we're being paid for fairly, right? So, and note my situation, equity. At one point in time, course enrollment for a course like this, the course cap would be 60 students, right? Okay, so just bear that in mind. Now, negative inequity, let's say that I believe equitable 60 students for the class and the pay I earned was an equitable arrangement. But let's suppose that the university says, well, you know what? I realize that you used to do this class with 60, but now you're going to do it with 150. But your pay doesn't change. And I'm like, you mean I got to teach 2.5 times as many students, that is, and that number of assignments, etc., but you're going to only pay me the same money. So I feel like I'm in a state of negative inequity. My workload has gone up, but the outcome, my pay, has not changed at all. So I'm on the downside. I'm getting the raw end of the stick, so to speak, thinking in negative inequity. Now, positive inequity is the flip side of this. This is when I'm doing less and getting more. Now, when the hell does that happen? But note that if you believe one of your teammates is barely putting any work in and they're getting the same number of points as you, then you might look at them and say they're in a state of positive inequity. At least you might say it after this lecture now that we've used the terms. It's often based to a comparison to relevant others, and Leon Festinger talked about social comparison theory. When we don't have a specific measurable scale that we can use, then our go-to is comparing us to someone else. Well, how much do they get and how much do they put in, right? So this is social comparison theory. So from that, we have 3 states of equity: negative inequity, or positive inequity. But guess what? There are individual differences, and we use the term equity sensitivity. We differ in how sensitive we are to these equity relationships. For some of us, we say, yeah, they're not doing as much as I am, but whatever, I don't care. That's their business, not my business, So we're not sensitive to that equity relationship necessarily. Other people are tremendously sensitive to equity situations. Now, the benevolence, we'll call these people, they're altruistic. They will carry an extra share of water on behalf of everyone on the planet, right? They will do more, and they're okay with receiving less. They're benevolent. they're altruistic, and they probably gain some level of satisfaction by knowing that they could be described that way. Now, the sensitives are all about reciprocity, so they want it absolutely equal. Right? One of my favorite examples was a guy when I was at the Salem mill, paper mill. He would not work 1 second over for the company. So when it's time for him to go, it was time for him to go. And like 3 p.m., you know, the day shift was 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I remember Bob, where would Bob be at 2:59? Bob is at the time clock at 2:59 with his time card sitting right there in the slot. And the clock, it's an old mechanical clock. This is several years ago, right? And the clock would click from 2:59 to 3. It goes at a minute at a time. Click. Boom. He'd punch his card. I mean, within 2 seconds of that clock going click, because he was not going to give the company an extra dime. Sensitive reciprocity. The entitles, these are the spoiled brats, if you will, the maximizers. So they seek to do as little and get as much as possible. And unfortunately, some of us have had the opportunity to work with people like this, and it sucks. Because they believe that we should be doing the bulk of the work and they should be receiving equal or more benefit. So, now, one thing to think as an employer, as a supervisor, God forbid as a parent, that's where it becomes really difficult. If people believe that they're being treated inequitably, if they believe that they're putting in more and getting out less, and they happen to be, let's say, at all sensitive to equity, right? They're going to figure out ways to make their world more equitable. So sometimes we see things like employee theft. That is, well, they don't pay me enough, you know, so I'm going to steal what I believe I'm owed or what I'm underpaid. Or maybe I'll hold back on my work. Well, you know, if they expect all this from me, you know what, I'm just going to slow my work down or just do less or just go through the motions. So people will tend to correct inequitable situations. And notice, what we're talking about when we talk about that is discrepancy reduction. Again, returning to that term. Questions, guys? Okay, we've been talking about goals, and I think we should probably get a little more into that, a little more specific about goals. You gotta have goals. Well, you don't gotta, but it sure doesn't hurt, right? Additional goal mechanisms. Why do goals work to increase performance? What are the mechanisms? Well, goals clarify performance expectations. So we can set goals for our employees, or we can set goals for ourselves, right? Interestingly, the employees probably set goals for managers as well, but they don't really have the power to enforce them to the same extent. Goals serve to counter apathy or boredom. So that is, what am I going to do today? Well, if I have a goal, if I have something in mind that I want to get done, then I become more energized, right? Goals make feedback important. And this is a huge point, right? Without goals, performance can be emotionally unimportant. If I don't have a goal to achieve a certain level of performance and I achieve but I don't care, then notice that I'm losing some of the richness of that feeling of success, of accomplishment, and that is being able to demonstrate my competence, especially for you, those of you who's got a high psychological need for competence. Goal attainment can generate a feeling of pride, satisfaction, competence that the task itself maybe doesn't generate. And note that a lot of tasks, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. A lot of goals, I want to, let's say, write that book, right? Well, there's a lot of steps on the way to writing that book. And a lot of those steps are probably not all that satisfying in of themselves, but they have to be done for the larger goal, right? So the task itself might not generate that kick in the pants, but the goal, achieving the larger goal may, right? So let's talk about the feedback. It's the importance of feedback or knowledge of results. Feedback documents the performs progress towards goal attainment. And again, feedback is a tricky one because who is the ultimate arbiter of the feedback you receive? in what domain are you playing? And you know, I've talked to some people and they said, well, you want to write a book? And I said, yeah, but don't get me wrong. I don't have any fantasies about this book selling well, right? So at the end of the day, if I finish the book, right, when I finish the book and I believe that it's well constructed, it achieves my standards, I will have achieved the goal. And the feedback will be from the finished product itself. Is it cohesive? Is it logical? Does it present its arguments clearly? Does it address counter arguments successfully? So these are all goals, mini goals that I would have for the overarching. Sales is not a good one. I think if how many of you want to be an artist? Have you ever thought about maybe being a painter or a sculptor, or being a musician and selling your music, writing music and selling it? That's tough. I mean, it's awesome if you write that hit song, right? And everyone is going to give you this feedback, awesome song. But you might also want to have a feedback plan that satisfies you based on your own evaluation, rather than, let's say, evaluation in terms of sales, right? Again, to take control of our own satisfaction, I think, becomes important in this regard. Feedback defines performance. Is it above standard? Is it at standard? Or is it below standard? Right? And for many of us, as we develop standards then, notice if it's below standard, then it's time to keep working on it. It's time to do more. It's time to persist. It's time to step back, take another look, and attack it again. Right? Feedback acts as a reinforcer. And you say, wow, this is much better now. I like this section. I like what I've done with it. And you say, wow, that's cool. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and rework this other section because I found reworking the previous section reinforcing. So it's a way to keep us going, to increase our persistence. Or it can be a punisher, and that is, boy, this is really shitty. I don't like what I've done here. But notice, we're still talking about goal creation in terms of reinforcing, or reduction of discrepancy in terms of punishing, at least initially. So let's look at the summary, the goal setting process, right? And so we're gonna talk about trying to integrate everything that we talked about up to this point. We have the goal, and remember, it's difficult and specific. If it is, then we know if it's specific, increase attention, increase strategic planning, boom, increases direction, right? And we'll develop an enhanced performance as a result of this. If it's difficult, then it's going to require us to increase our effort, increase our persistence, increased energy devoted to the project, and then increased direction, increased energy. Remember, those are the two components. What's motivation? Direction and energy, direction and effort. Boom. Part 2. Yes, I love models, so please suffer along with me. We have the enhanced performance where we left off. The feedback. Feedback shows performance at or above the goal level. We feel satisfaction, discrepancy or challenge creation. At this point we say, wow, I kicked ass on that. I'm going to create a new goal for myself. I love this feeling of accomplishment that is demonstrated to me, right, through the feedback. I love this accomplishment. I'm going to do something maybe even a little tougher next time. Right? Now, feedback shows performance below goal level, felt dissatisfaction. Now we're going to discrepancy reduction, right? Goal continues with increased persistence, attention, and strategic planning. Is discrepancy reduction a bad thing? No, it isn't. It's getting better. We reduce the discrepancy, ultimately we're going to get better. But notice we use both. When we're feeling dissatisfied or the feedback is a little negative, then go ahead and operate in the discrepancy reduction. I gotta rewrite this so it's better, right? And then, but to the extent that we can begin to move our life more into the upper level, we're going to find life more gratifying and authenticity more attainable. Oh my God, these cats are nuts. So, measurement then is feedback. Well, total quality management was based on this idea, and the work of W. Edward Deming, described in his book Out of the Crisis, etc., is about continuous improvement. So what do? We measure. We measure where we're at. We measure, we measure, we measure. This tells us about our present state. And he's talking in a manufacturing paradigm or service paradigm. We measure. How well are we doing? What is our reject rate? What is our efficiency? What are our customer complaints? All of these we measure. And then from there, we seek to make changes in the process, make changes in the system, and then measure the outcome to demonstrate improvement. So using Deming's philosophy, this total quality management philosophy, is all about measurement. And that's what feedback is measurement, right? We measure beforehand, we measure afterwards, and we see if we're meeting the difference that we want to create. So to assess the current state, to set the goal, to verify goal attainment, measurement is necessary throughout, right? Note that used most effectively, measurement is part of the process conducted by those embedded in the process. And when we were using total quality management, when we were adopting these ideas in the paper mill, that's what we did. First thing we did was teach ourselves how to measure. And then we teach ourselves how to conduct experiments in real time on real processes. And then we teach ourselves how to measure the results. And then we need the statistical analysis, because we need to look at the pre-measure and the post-measure, and do they represent a statistically significant difference in our desired direction. So it really is about the empirical analysis. And the more people that we involve in this process, the better our success. And we had tremendous success in doing this. So goal processes. What are some variables that moderate the goal? Well, goal acceptance. Do people accept or reject the goal? And as a manager, as a leader in an organization, this is one of the things I need to do, is often sell the goals, right? So that people internalize the goals. And think about your first paper, because that's somewhat what we're talking about here, is motivating people in terms of explanatory rationale. Right? The goal choice, the ideal goal, the actual goal, and what's the minimal goal. So this has a lot to do with standard setting, right? And then short-term versus long-term goal setting, and this is one of the most difficult aspects. Short-term goals are relatively easy to set and relatively easy to achieve. People will persist for a short-term goal. Long-term goals often become so difficult to wrap one's head around that they lose their motivational properties. We start floundering. We don't have specific activities on a daily basis to reach that goal, and it just becomes more and more nebulous. So these are the variables that moderate the goal and the performance relationship. So always important to consider these. Do my people or do I myself accept this goal? Right? What is the goal? Is it an ideal? Is it actual? What is a minimal goal? And short-term and long-term. So 4 factors that will affect the goal acceptance, that first variable. What's the perceived difficulty? There's an inverse relationship between goal difficulty and goal commitment. Now, remember, we said that difficult goals challenge, and we grow as a result of that. But sometimes, if it seems too challenging, especially if we're in a supervisory role, and it seems too challenging to those that we're supervising, that can be a problem, right? So, difficulty goes along with the notion of self-efficacy. What's my belief that I can accomplish it? Now, participation in the goal-setting process is much better to get people who are involved. I know that's a double use of that word. But often the people who are involved are not involved in the act, or not involved in the goal-setting process. They're going to do the work, but they had nothing with setting the goal. That's a bad combination. Buy-in. That term buy-in. You got to get people's buy-in if you want them to be energized by the goal. It has to be their goal as well as your goal, the organizational's goal, right? Hey, Annika, are you blocking some of the light, sweetie? All right. Credibility. Credibility of person assigning the goal. If they got their head up their ass, then why do we care? I'm not interested in their goal, right? And then extrinsic incentives can matter. And to the extent that there's some reward at the end of the tunnel for achieving that goal, then that can help to motivate as well. we do know that extrinsic motivators do have a motivational property, right? But again, remember in paper 1, one of the easiest ways to destroy someone's intrinsic motivation is to ply them with extrinsic rewards, right? So, 4 predictors of goal choice. Each predictor provides an independent contribution. So, ability, that is, what am I capable of? Self-efficacy, what is my belief in my ability to accomplish? What are my past performances? And past performances sound like what that we've been talking about just a few moments ago. That's the source of feedback. So past performances are inexorably tied to feedback. It's one of the best sources of feedback, right? And then incentives, that is, how desirable would achieving this goal be, right? So these are the elements that you would manipulate to get people on board in attaining a goal, moving towards a goal, let's say. Or for yourself. Do I have the ability to do this? Do I believe that I can do it? What do my past performances dictate? And what are the incentives? And note, if I'm going to write a book, these are the... Can I write the book? Sure, I can write. I can write well enough to write a book, right? I'm not the best writer on the planet, but I'm certainly not the worst. And I've had a lot of training in writing, and I think a lot about writing, having taught writing for years. And it appears that I will be teaching the second level writing course once again for the 70th, 80th time, right, in the fall semester. Social Psych 236701 if you're shopping for a writing course. Self-efficacy, what's my belief I can do it? Well, I believe I can do it. I can write a book. Past performance, I've written a dissertation, I've written a master's thesis that were successfully defended and, you know, presented those to a pretty harsh audience. I believe I can do that. And the incentive, I know that I will feel awesome for having done it, for having accomplished it. And that really is my incentive. I believe I've got something to say. I want to say it well. I want to say it clearly. I want to say it efficiently and effectively, and hopefully maybe even entertainingly, right? And again, the incentive is not the money. It's not the intrinsic. That would be nice, right? But that's not what I'm counting on. It's just the idea of accomplishing it, of doing it, right? So, let's talk about short-term. Pass short-term goal, pass exam 3 in my psychology course. Example of long-term goal, become a teacher in the public school system. All right. Note that one is right in front of our face, and that's the short-term. The long-term, the problem with long-term goals, we should have them. No two ways about it. But there's a prolonged period of time in which performance goes unreinforced. That is, I got to do all these acts, but if all I focus in is the long-term goal, I got to do like 11 acts that offer me no reinforcement. They have little incentive value. It's the big enchilada that has the incentive value when we do long-term goals. The interim, we have to create interim goals, short-term goals that give us the sense of satisfaction as we're achieving the long-term goal. So if clever goal setters do both, short-term goals and long-term goals. So today I'm going to get 3 pages written about the history of competition as studied in the laboratory. Right? And that's my short-term goal. The long-term goal is the completed book, right? But the short-term goals allow me to have a sense of feedback regarding incremental success towards the long-term goal. So that's what we need to do. Therefore, right, performer may benefit by translating long-term goals into a series of short-term goals. And it's especially necessary relative to uninteresting tasks to perform. And again, that might take us back to paper 1. Notice that when I did my dissertation, Marilyn was very much, you know, kind of directing me in this fashion. We got 4 chapters. Here's the order we're going to do those chapters in, right? Here are the components. And then each chapter was broken down into the parts. With my master's thesis, it was probably even more so. That is, I want to, here's the big picture of what we're going to talk about, how people assign punishment. But then during my lead up to the master's, my first 2 years of graduate school, I have 5 experiments that I designed and conducted and analyzed to illuminate mechanisms of how people determine how to punish others. Each one of those, so each was a little part, a little part, a little part, right? And I would fit them together. So short-term goals, little chunks that are eventually put together for the long term. So here's another example, right? What do we need to do? Well, a long-term goal is a complex lattice, a complex cognitive lattice of these structures, right? So I want to become a concert pianist. Well, that would be awesome. What would be the result of becoming a concert pianist? Well, that would be my ideal career, right? I'd have a happy family life if I was able to do this. And my parents would be absolutely proud and delighted. So that would be the outcomes. But notice, what does this take to become a concert pianist? Well, I probably have to pass an audition so that I'm taken on and I can become a private student with someone. And then I can debut with a master pianist, right? But I need to be selected by a jury, become the conservatory student, and graduate from Juilliard. Or I have to get admitted, become a university student, and graduate from the Ohio State. So note, the goals, long-term goals, like becoming a concert pianist, right? There's more than one path to achieve that goal. So flexibility in goal setting, thinking about the approach, how do I get there, right? Maybe there's different approaches available to me, right? All right, dangers, pitfalls, we got to talk it, right? In goal setting, what do we know? Increased stress. Goals are too difficult. I set too many goals. I have goals that conflict, right? Then that's probably going to increase my stress. The possibility of failure? Certainly, right? Especially if we're acting creatively and proactively, or it's likely we're going to fail initially. Maybe several times, right? Difficult goals may lead to sub-goal performance and therefore be detrimental emotional consequences associated with failure. So your tolerance of failure and your tolerance of uncertainty is a moderating individual difference variable in this relationship. Non-goal areas ignored, and this could be, a big problem. That is, if we focus too intently on our goal, then we may be missing out on other aspects of life, right? And we see that some people pursue goals to an extent that they destroy their relationships with others. Well, and that's an individual decision on how one handles that trade-off. Short-range thinking, proximal versus distal goal setting ideas, and there's a fine balance to achieve both proximal and distal goals. All right. Then cheating. When goals are made public and involve extrinsic incentives, they can create performance pressure that prompts efforts at cheating rather than at skill development. And this is something that breaks my heart at COAM, is when we see someone come in, a student come in, and they have this goal, especially it seems associated with medical school, that they want to become a doctor, which is a very distal goal, right? And all that matters is becoming a doctor because they'll live in a way they want to or make money. So if I cheat on today's test, that would be okay because it's ultimately in the service of my goal, my long-term goal. And so sometimes this becomes a problem, right? It undermines intrinsic motivation, and I've already discussed this, right? If a task is interesting, short-term goals are typically, right, experienced as controlling and undermine the intrinsic motivation. But the short-term goals are necessary. So I think the mindfulness of these pitfalls can go a long way for us, just helping us negotiate the potential pitfalls. And now, let's talk implementation intentions. Fancy term, right? It's a specific goal-directed action initiated at anticipated future outcomes. So I set the goal, make a GPA of 4.0, or consume less than 2,000 calories a day, run this mile in 8 minutes. All right, well, there's 2 of those that weren't on my list. Which ones do you think those were? Oh, wait a second. Okay, suck that in. All right, so No, seriously, in community college, I did my 2 years of community college. I had a 4.0, and that opened the doors to UCI on scholarship, etc. And then it became a challenge because it's like, okay, so we're just going to maintain this 4.0. We're halfway there. We got it. Let's see if we can get it the rest of the way. And believe it or not, I actually did. Right, Annika? So we graduated UCI with 4.0. And that made me a relatively desirable candidate for graduate school. It's funny, when I met my half-sister, believe it or not, met my half-sister about 3 years ago. Where did she go to college? She went to Irvine. Now, she went to Irvine straight out of high school. I went when I was 42 years old. But we both, without knowing it, both went to the same undergraduate institution, UCI. And I remember, so we were talking about it. She said, yeah, she said she did really well, and she graduated magna cum laude. Rachel, that is freaking awesome. And I graduated summa cum laude, so pretty funny. Anyway, so planning how to attain the goal. Set the goal, plan how to attain it. Now, implementation intentions, right? Getting started despite daily distractions. How many of you have an issue with that, right? This is tough sometimes. Right? I had to get my ass up here to start taping. I wanted to get these lectures taped. There's a lot of distractions on the way to getting here this morning, right? And a lot of them are feline, right? And furry. So, B, persisting in spite of difficulties and setbacks. So maybe something isn't going well. What is my plan for surmounting obstacles? And then C, resuming once an interruption occurs. And so all of these are skill sets that you build over time as part of your implementation intentions. You should have a plan that addresses getting started, persisting in the face of difficulties, and resuming when you've been interrupted. So that's all part of your goal-setting plan. So, implementation intentions further. What do we know? Getting started, goal pursuit, persisting and finishing, attaining goals, right, requires not only effective goal setting, but also a pre-action period in which one decides when, where, how that goal will be implemented. I think I pretty much laid that out for you. I'm sure you're sick of hearing about that I want to write this book. But note, I got a freaking plan in place. So it's getting started. I've got some outlines. I got some notes, etc. I'm not full-blown on it yet because I really need to devote my time to the goal of delivering you high-quality classes. That's a much more proximal goal, and I think a more important goal because it involves more people. Right. So, goal pursuit, persisting in implementation intention help one direct attention toward the goal-directed action while excluding distractions. Now, automatic implementation intentions is a strange little technique that was developed by Gollwitzer. And what Gollwitzer did is he actually put people in a position, students in a position, where he had them create automatic implementation intentions. It's a real simple system. What he did is he has a student say, I intend to finish my essay on what I did over Christmas break when I encounter, and then they fill in that blank there, which could be when I encounter New Year's Eve or whatever. But what you're doing is when I encounter Y as your environmental trigger, it's your stimulus, and you're linking the stimulus to an action. The idea is when you say this statement out loud, Gollwitzer had students say it out loud, right? What happens is it gets internalized. It becomes non-conscious at some point. You don't think about it, but you're bopping around life, and all of a sudden you encounter the directed stimulus, and it triggers the non-conscious to push the goal back up into consciousness. So it's understanding the relationship between our conscious and non-conscious minds, which becomes so amazingly important, right? And utilizing it to our own benefit. Now, he has students in the control condition. They made no implementation intention in this class, and the other half of the students made the implementation intention. And when they came back after winter break, because some schools have a Christmas break, right? When they came back, 75% of the students who were in the implementation intention condition came back with the paper done. Only 25% of the students in the control condition, no implementation intention, had the paper done. And I think it's pretty solid evidence. Okay, I want to show us a quick video here. I think it's a really cool idea. It melds together a couple ideas. One is goal setting, but the other part is the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. But I'm going to allow our speaker here to, in fact, talk about this. So let's hear from a consultant. This is a guy who makes much more money than I do, so maybe his words carry more oomph or not. I don't know. But let's check it out here. So I'm going to put this back here. Hey, Monica. What? All right.
Ask for the job you want. Ask for the salary you want. Ask for the responsibilities you want. Hello, I'm Brian Tracy, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of the most helpful concepts of time and life management. It's called the 80-20 rule. Now, the 80-20 rule is also called the Pareto principle, named after its founder, the Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto, in 1895. He noticed that people in society seemed to divide naturally into what he called the vital few, or the top 20%, in terms of money, property, and influence, and the trivial many, or the bottom 80%. Later he discovered that virtually all economic activity was subject to this same principle, in that 80% of the wealth of Italy during that time was controlled by 20% of the population. We can take Pareto's 80-20 rule and apply it to almost any situation. In particular, we can apply it to goal setting and productivity. According to this principle, 20% of your activities will account for 80% of your results. That means if you have a list of 10 items to accomplish, 2 of those items will turn out to be worth more than the other 8 items put together. The sad fact is that most people procrastinate on the top 10 or 20% of items that are the most valuable and important, the vital few that account for all your success, and instead they busy themselves with the least important 80%, the trivial many that contribute very little or nothing to their success. So here's what you should do in order to effectively apply the 80-20 rule to goal setting and to your overall productivity. First, take a piece of paper and write down 10 goals. Then ask yourself, if you could only accomplish one of the goals on that list today, within 24 hours, which one goal would have the greatest positive impact on your life? I ask this question of my clients all over the world. What is your most important goal in life right now, which you need to know, by the way, if you want to be successful? Then pick the second most important goal. What you'll find is that after you complete this exercise, you will have determined the most important 20% of your goals that will help you more than anything else you do. Second, you should work at those goals that you have chosen all the time. You often see people who appear to be busy all day long, but seem to accomplish very little. This is almost always because they're busy working on tasks that are of low value or no value, while they are procrastinating on the 1 or 2 activities that can make a real difference to their companies and to their careers. The most valuable tasks you can do each day are often the hardest and most complex, but the payoff and rewards for completing them can be tremendous. They can actually change your whole future. Before you begin work, always ask yourself, is this task in the top 20% of my activities, or is it in the bottom 80%? The rule for this is simple. Resist the temptation to clear up small things first. That's the greatest killer. We become so involved in little things, and little things multiply. They just become more and more, and at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you've accomplished nothing. If you choose to start your day working on low-value tasks, you'll soon develop the habit of always starting and working on low-value tasks. You'll be like a horse that pulls the wheel around in a circle all day, never makes any progress. Finally, I want to tell you about a study that's just been done about the attitudes of rich people versus poor people with regard to goal setting. What they found is that 85% of rich people have one big goal that they work on all the time. Only 3% of poor people have a big goal, and they don't work on it very much. So if you want to be wealthy, do what wealthy people do. Pick one big goal and work on it all the time. And if you do, it will change your life. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a thought to share with your friends and followers. It is this: when your goals are clear, you will come up with exactly the right answer to achieve your goals at exactly the right time. So those are my strategies for applying the 80-20 rule to goal setting. If you haven't seen my other videos about goal setting and increasing your productivity, take a look. Now, I'd love to hear from you, so my question today is, do you use the 80-20 rule for goal setting and time management? And if you do, what changes have you noticed in your life? Leave a comment below, and I'll be sure to follow up with you. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you want to change your future, take action, and take action now. To learn more about goal setting, download my 14-step goal setting guide by clicking the link on the screen or in the description below to help you get on track with your goals.
All right. I mean, I think it's fair to allow people to advertise their deal since I'm using this video. But I think he sums things up nicely. And it's the big items. It's the heavy hitters, the ones that have the greatest potential for challenging you, that are going to change the nature of your life. There's little he said that is inconsistent with the entire contents of this lecture, and I think it becomes a nice summary situation. So put the big things up front, you know, and a lot of times people say, well, I'm waiting to get into the mood. I'm waiting to get into the mood to do that. Well, that's not the way it works, right? And something we talk about in psychology of emotion. If you're waiting for an emotional state, then you're really kind of taking a reactive approach. You got to be proactive, and but I don't feel like doing this, and I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to get myself jacked up if I'm going to play an upbeat song or do some exercise to get my blood pumping, but. It's learning. It's us learning to be essentially the masters of ourselves, and he's got some really good concrete advice there. Now, the poor rich thing, I don't know. I'm not big. It's wealth is not part of my goal. I don't want to become wealthy, but I do want to become increasingly authentic because. By nature, I'm kind of an existential psychologist, if you will, or an existential social psychologist. So authenticity is my goal, and becoming myself. And remember those psychological qualities. If we're talking competence, if we're talking relatedness, if we're talking autonomy, what are your goals? What are your hot buttons? What do you want to get done? And put that stuff forward. Do yourself the favor like he's suggesting. So maybe it's not wealth. I know it's not wealth for me. I mean, I want to have adequate money so I can retire comfortably, but that is by no means being wealthy, right? And I will also say as a counterpoint that I don't like making necessarily that division between rich and poor people. Unfortunately, a lot of people who have been lower socioeconomic status don't necessarily have models of good goal setting. That maybe their parents and the people in their community have never learned to goal set, so they don't transmit that knowledge, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes a self-sustaining. So you can see that schools can play a primary role in transmitting this information in the way they design instruction, and I'm talking from kindergarten on, right? So let's put it all together, right? So, putting it all together, an effective goal-setting program, sequential steps within the goal-setting process. So we're going to start at the upper. I always get confused. This is the upper left for you guys, right? So we're going to specify the objective to be accomplished. Remember, specific is better. We're going to choose difficult goals that challenge us, but so we're going to define the goal difficulty. We're going to define the goal specificity. We're going to specify the time span until performance will be assessed. So we're going to plan that there's going to be an evaluation, and we're going to make this evaluation at this point along the process. And if it's a long-term goal, then this could be multiple evaluations, right? We're going to check on goal acceptance, either ourselves or if we're helping others design goals for themselves. We're going to discuss goal attainment strategies, and you can see there's a kind of a team flavor to this as well, but this is something that could be done internally for an individual goal as well. We're going to create implementation intentions. So that's really the how-to and the when-to. And then we're going to provide performance feedback to others, or we're going to develop systems to provide feedback to ourselves. That's it. And as we begin to master these abilities, right? This is not about performance orientation. This is about mastery orientation. As we master these abilities, and we're going to talk more about mastery later, right? The extent to which we succeed, and I know it's cliche, is almost limitless. But we'll build on our past successes and attain ever more gratifying future successes. So I want to leave you with that, and remember this was embedded with homework 5, so let's say goodbye. And who do we have here? Well, we have Skinny in the foreground. Poor Pigpen, we lost a couple years ago. And of course, everybody's favorite in the home, Digby the dog, passed away last year. I'm sorry, year before last. But we still suffer from Digby's loss, but there they are, Digby, Pigpen, and Skinny, 3 musketeers, if you will. I want you guys to have a great day.